without much further ado, please put your hands together for George Snyder.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm missing a page. I'm George Snyder. And here we are. I was so nervous earlier, and when I get nervous, I remember my friend Joe, who would look at me and say, "What is wrong with you?" And I would say, "Well, I'm nervous. I'm nervous." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because I'm worried." And he said, "But about what?" He said, "You've already ruined your life. Just relax." This is hard. This is hard to do. And if it weren't hard to do for me, I wouldn't be, there wouldn't be books here. I've been coming up during the week to watch, and they had wine and cheese and at the one Tuesday night, and Book Soup has been very nice. They said, "Well, you can have wine at yours." I said, "Oh, no, I think that would be a bad idea. It's not that sort of crowd." And at least speaking for myself, I wouldn't be able to get enough. And I wouldn't be able to, I know I would come to and think, what happened, and whose books are all of these, and who are all of you. The last time I did a book reading in Los Angeles was 20 years ago. It was at A Different Light in Silver Lake on Sunset. Yeah, I was part of a collection called Hometowns, edited by John Preston. And, I'm trying to pick up the pace. Every 20 years I think I felt encouraged, but in fact, in July 1st, I'm going to be part of the Idlewild series, author series, and Eduardo, founded and sponsored and coordinated by Eduardo Santiago. Raise your hand. Sponsored by Penn USA. So, and I have flyers. I have flyers. So afterward, if you want to find out more about everybody else in that series, is named Amy. Amy Efron, Amy Friedman, Amy George Snyder. So we have those. I want to, Eduardo, I want to thank Book Soup for hosting. And I want to, again, thank you all for here. They said we could have wine. I said it was a bad idea. They also said I could start late. And I said, no, this crowd is going to come early and they're going to want to help set up. In fact, Bianca was rearranging some of the books earlier. But if we stay too late, they will bring out a cake. I told them, bring out a cake, sing happy birthday, and everybody will be gone in 15 minutes. I brought Easter candy. It's part of... Book 2 Easter plays not an insignificant role, and Book 1 is about birds, so eggs, birds. Book 1 is called On Wings of Affection, which I've been told is a terrible title, and it's from a terrible translation of a good book called The Conference of the Birds by a Persian poet, and actually Book Soup, this is a pitch for Book Soup. It's actually in the philosophy section over there. They have a beautiful illustrated edition if you'd like to see that. Irony and parody are fraught with danger. That's all I can say. I'm going to read from a little tiny bit, just so we know where we're all going here, because we want to get out of here early. I'm going to read a little bit from Book 1, a little bit from Book 2, a little bit from upcoming Book 3, which will be out in July. And, there are free t-shirts, Richard, for free t-shirts. For anyone who is willing to wear it in public. I learned my lesson. Now they are all just boys small, because I was told that's all that anyone in West Hollywood wears. They shrink too. We have limited edition, not sold in any store. So, t-shirts, Oh, and I wanted to tell you this: all the proceeds from my proceeds from the sale of any books tonight I'm giving to McIntyre House. So for those of you who are like, "Oh, girl, I already bought that book," know that you could buy another for Aunt Helen, and Christmas is coming, and I will be making a donation to McIntyre House. Just to give you a little overview, the Sam Pam Didier Adventure Series is a series of... right now, I can think of 7 in the series. It could get more, but it's a series of cautionary tales about living in Los Angeles. Sam is loosely based on me. He's the narrator. He's loosely because he's much younger. In much better shape. He goes to the gym a lot more often because, after all, he doesn't have to write these books. I am told he looks a little bit like Neil Patrick Harris with glasses. And Didier, as you all know, is a drop-dead gorgeous, charismatic, flawless young Frenchman who many of you have told me you realize is based on you. You're right. And Pam, who is a 16-year-old teenage girl from an extremely wealthy family, who, oddly enough, until just now, no one claimed as being a character, but Philip seems to think that. In another life, I taught in a girls' school, and so I know something about teenage girls, and how much they're like gay men. With the shallow, violent relationships, the competitive nature, the body consciousness, fashion consciousness. Anyway, those are the 3 characters. I'm going to start. Why don't I just start reading? Oh, and I should also tell you, Sam is a member of a certain anonymous social club that is of service. I was going to actually calling it the Being Helpful series, because Sam is very committed to being helpful to a fault. So I'll start with book 1. Yeah, let's just do this, right? Seated as we were at one of the little iron tables littering the sidewalk, we could not help being ringside when the Bentley glided up and came to a quiet, elegant stop at the curb. The uniformed driver came round and opened the back passenger door. Winnie Tanninger emerged, and before you begin to complain about unlikely coincidences or start to object about the blatant artistic license you are convinced I've taken with the facts, before that is, you lecture me on the limits a reader can be expected to go, suspending disbelief for the sake of a good story. Let me remind you that we were, after all, in West Hollywood on a Saturday morning, within spitting distance of the Pacific Design Center that, like a giant blue sow suckling its litter of cute little decorator shops, loomed in the sky behind us. And so besides the few of us who might have dropped in on our social club to see friends, most of the denizens of the neighborhood, which is to say a host of bachelor decorators and their overnight acquaintances, adhered to a strict tradition called Saturday brunch, and so you were bound to see anyone who was anyone out and about. In other words, one more old decorator showing up for breakfast was hardly anything out of the ordinary, even one as deeply unpleasant as Winnie. And so to resume, when he emerged from the tinted windowed and finely upholstered sarcophagus of the back seat of the Bentley, swept a manicured hand through what one might call a suspiciously full mane of snowy white hair, then adjusted the folds and fit of what no doubt in Winnie's mind passed as suitable attire for a gentleman spending the weekend at his country house. Very tweedy and bespoke, very merchant ivory, Fortnum & Mason, Hepburn in the boot, old boy. He hesitated and with a predator's trained eye regarded everyone on the sidewalk with a thinly veiled look of disdain, as you might expect. All of us became deeply engrossed in our meals, focused on our plates, our coffee, the condiments, the maple syrup pitcher, the pavement, and everything might have been well, and nothing out of the ordinary have ever transpired. The world would have continued spinning on its wobbly axis if I had not, for some inexplicable reason, chosen to glance up from the origami flamingo I was fashioning out of my napkin, and my heart stopped. For in that moment, out of the Bentley and into the glorious sunlight of Southern California appeared a young man who was, as suggested by the proprietary fashion with which Winnie gestured to him, the old hawk's latest friend. And yes, dear reader, even in a city where beauty is taken for granted, where handsome youth is a given, A constant supply everywhere you turn, replenished on a daily basis with fresh arrivals, each one beautiful, each one with a headshot and a dream. Yes, it is still possible to notice. We are jaded but not dead. There are rare exceptions, and afterwards, as so often happens in the case of exceptions, especially exceptional beauty, but also in cases of miraculous encounters with the divine, afterward there would be some disagreement as to what precisely we'd all seen. What exactly had composed the experience? What specifically had caught our eye? As I think you can appreciate in this instance, everyone stared. Even our breakfast guests, mouths full of pancake and butter and syrup, gaped, slack-jawed. "Fuck," said one in a mixture of envy and desire. "Fuck," echoed his twin in unequivocal agreement. And yet, as shamelessly shallow, yet not insincere appreciation of the youth's attraction might sound, further elaboration proved more of a challenge than you might anticipate. For beyond the mere praising of individual body parts, the ones visible at any rate, or those that could be guessed at, since his vision of perfection did happen to be fully clothed and so left something to the imagination. In short, and instead of simply saying things like, "Those eyes, that hair, that nose, that jaw, those lips," one was hard-pressed to explain more precisely the reasons for our profound reactions to the young man's appeal. Even comparisons to the famous failed us, and were soon abandoned by my companions in favor of fruits and vegetables. "Like two melons," one of the twins observed, which led to speculation about other parts of the anatomy. At this mention of zucchini, however, Arnold called a halt to the discussion. "Guys, Jesus, give me a break," Arnold pleaded. "I'm understanding, but I'm still straight. I have my limits." "Don't look at me," I retorted, for I had strenuously attempted to ignore this vulgar chatter. My thoughts were on a higher plane altogether. My heart was, as they say, full. Very full. The young man who had arrived with Winnie stepped forward at the older man's command and extended his hand to each of us. An ocean roar filled my ears and drowned out all sound, but later I would learn his name, DJ. Longer, and I might have been lost forever in the passionate depths of those luminous dark brown orbs, adorably shaded by an unruly lock of glossy black hair that kept falling perfectly across his forehead. His smile, however, sufficed to hint at everything our eyes could only attempt to express. The wordless exchange of kindred souls meeting at last, recognition, joy, pain, understanding, exquisite tenderness, shared dreams, smoldering passion. You understand, of course, that everything in that moment, for it was but a moment and yet an eternity as well, transpired in a sweet, giddy, mystical blur, as if underwater at the bottom of a pool, looking up at the figures waving and wobbling with the lapping of the water. I had looked into the boy's eyes, but at the same time I felt as though I had looked into his heart, perhaps even into his soul. Far away, the mundane world continued. There was a distant sound of laughter and small talk. "What a small world," Winnie Tanninger observed to Arnold. He nodded to me, winked at our cohorts in their hooded sweatshirts, and swept onward, his young god in tow. As you can imagine, it's downhill from there with Sam and Didier. Book 2. Book 2, and Book 2, for reasons I can't even begin to explain, Sam and Pam, and later we find out Didier, end up in Ohio. Now, coincidentally, I'm from Ohio. Oddly enough, so is Sam. It's during Pam's spring break. Oh, she goes to Tarryton, which seems a lot like Marlborough, just as a reference for those of you from... Chapter 2 of Down the Garden Path. Northern Ohio puts on a brave face for spring. Here and there, a hardy crocus sticks its little head through a hole in the melting snow, hoping against hope for a ray of sunshine. House pets come out from under the sofa or next to the furnace to peek timidly out the frosted windows at the barren landscape. Wild animals like woodchucks, rail thin from the lean winter months, turn into roving gangs of crack-fueled teens, overturning trash cans and loitering around the dumpsters of fast food emporiums. End of winter is a hungry, violent time. There is always the danger that this year's spring is going to come just a little too late to make any difference. The tiny hard buds that have fought their way to the surface and are straining for one more little ray of sunshine to burst forth may still fail to mature. Burned off like warts in a sudden overnight freeze when the temperature dips back down and life says, "Nope, sorry, you lose. This time it's permanent. This time winter is never going to end." In my youth, I spent more than one Easter weekend making snow bunnies in Rose's yard, packing the heavy damp accumulation around sticks to make the ears. Snow boots with your new Easter suit were not uncommon. That we might need tie or chains to get to church for Palm Sunday was not beyond the realm of possibility. On the other hand, you might find yourself knee-deep in mud and the creek swollen to flood level. The foil-covered chocolate egg you hid in your mitten might melt before the benediction, or it might still be frozen hard enough to be the snow bunny's nose. You never knew. Marshmallow Peeps, of course, were a different story, impervious to the elements. They had a half-life comparable to plutonium. Partly, this is what they call the lake effect. The theory being that the Canadians keep their thermostat set to Celsius, so it is always colder up there. And then they send the snow south across the lake so that it runs out of steam and dumps itself at the first sight of land, being the American shoreline, which is where we lived. Consequently, we had snow long before and long after everyone else in the country. We were busy shoveling when people down south were wondering if they'd have a white Christmas. We'd still be shoveling after the rest of the country had moved on to shorts and tank tops. I tried warning Pam, but as you know, the mind can only take in so many contradictions before it short circuits and refuses to comply. She had reached the stage of shaking her head to ward off any more information. "Oh my God," she now whispered in awe, gazing out the window of her mother's Gulf Stream as we swept over Lake Erie. "You can't see the other side." Well, no, of course you can't see the other side. But it's a lake. Well, it's one of the Great Lakes, I reminded her, technically speaking. At least, although in terms of grade, I would recommend Superior or even Huron as opposed to Erie being the shallowest of them all. "It looks like the ocean," Pam observed. "Well, I suppose so," I conceded, "from up here perhaps. But trust me, when you get close, you will not confuse the two. There are no dolphins, for one thing, and no refreshing salt air, no white sandy beaches." "Pretty, though," Pam said. And given that the sky was a brilliant blue and the water reflected it back in a shifting mix of violet and hazel and teal with a splash of tinfoil sparkles where the sun caught the rough caps, I had to admit it was not an unappealing sight. For myself, however, I was significantly more impressed with the stretch Lincoln town car the Van Loon Company had thought to provide us. Once we landed and bid adieu to Pam's mother and the plane's crew, in particular the extremely personable young pilot who could not have been more accommodating on our flight from L.A. to a private airfield on the lake outside of Cleveland. "Oh my God," I whispered, echoing Pam's earlier remark as we settled in for the drive to Arcadia. I had tried very hard in front of everyone, particularly her mother, not to behave as if I were overly impressed by the comfort of the plane, but now that Pam and I had settled into the plush interior of the Lincoln, and we were gliding silently toward our destination, I indulged myself with a little thrill of delight. I could hardly wait for my cousin Rose to see us arrive in such style. Even the reaction of the good people of Arcadia as we floated slowly through the center of town made the trip worthwhile. Normally, of course, I would eschew a stretch limousine, at least in L.A., when all it really means is prom night in the valley, or I just got a series regular role on the WB. But in Arcadia, the curiosity provoked by the few locals who stared, jaws unhinged, as we passed by made me appreciate the importance of making an entrance. Rose's house, a hybrid Queen Anne and shingle-style structure of many gables, porches, chimneys, and a tower, sat back from the street in an enormous lawn, and gardens in the back, including one special area devoted not unexpectedly to roses. She stood waiting on the wide front steps as we pulled up. "The phone's been ringing off the wall," she said. "The whole town felt obligated to alert me to your arrival." I said something about how I did enjoy making a stir. "Of course you did," Rose observed. She wore a simple cotton shirtwaist dress, which indicated her concession to the importance of the occasion. In other words, she had dressed up. Normally, she would have been in a plaid shirt and slacks. I, on the other hand, and as you might expect, had come prepared for winter. But as we stood on Rose's porch, I will confess I felt a little overdressed in my Patagonia Parker, long underwear, sweater, a scarf, boots. I took off my ski cap as I made the introductions. "What did he tell you? He was taking you to the North Pole?" Rose asked Pam. "Sort of," the girl replied, "but I didn't listen to him." "Wise of you," Rose observed. "You really shouldn't pay too much attention to anything he says, even if the weather is a little unpredictable." At this I reminded Rose of the snow bunnies, but she dismissed my attempts to justify the wardrobe. She assured Pam that in any case she had warm enough clothes at hand to dress an army if it came to that, which of course it wouldn't amount to worry. "Meanwhile," she said, waving to the crocus-littered lawn and beds of daffodils, as though the flowers rendered further discussion unnecessary, "and yes, Possibly I've neglected to mention that it was one of those absolutely perfect spring days you can very occasionally enjoy in this part of the country when everything that can possibly blossom does, and strangers in shirt sleeves nod to you with a smile, and small children in shorts run about and laugh, and baby animals gamble and play, and everyone revels in the pure joy of the season. If I forgot to mention that, it is only because, as I said, you so rarely experience such days in this part of the country, so forgive me. Sorry if I gave you the wrong impression. Then my sprightly dear old cousin said she hoped we were hungry after our long trip and invited us in, including the driver, who was not allowed to leave until he'd had a chance to rest a little and had a corn fritter with maple syrup, deep-fried food being a staple in this part of the world, in case I haven't mentioned that either. So that's